Welcome to episode 27 of Successful Demo, niche episode where we analyze the theoretical and practical aspects of one newly released cards. Today we'll be looking at Kabonesa Wu, the new shaper identity from this cycle. Let's dissect this identity. This allows you to search your stack for a non-virus program and install it, lowering its cost by 1 credit, but it will be removed from the game if it's still installed when your turn ends. So it has a couple of upsides here in that it allows you to tutor your programs anytime, anywhere, as long as you have clicks. You notice that unlike most other identities which fire once per turn, Kabonesa Wu's ability is a click ability that is not restricted by turns, so you could theoretically fire this as many or as few times as you like, making this an identity you probably want to build around because you want to get lots of triggers to make running Kabonesa Wu rather effective. She's pretty efficient. Now, there's some subtle mathematics to this, but in a normal shaper deck, it usually costs you 1 click to draw the program, some icebreaker for example, into your hand, and another click to install it before you can start using it. Kabonesa Wu is different. If you use her click ability, it only costs you 1 click to get the program from your stack onto your board, thereby saving you a click, and not to mention the -1 install cost as well. So she can actually be rather efficient, on par with the other click saving identity abilities such as Haley Kaplan. Now, she's not without her downsides. Of course, the remove from game downside is actually a pretty massive one. No one likes the programs being removed from the game, but there are some ways to work around it with the current card pool. Again, this further contributes to the idea of building around the identity ability. You don't just slot any random shaper deck into Kabonesa Wu, you need some way to mitigate this downside. So the first and most obvious way to do so is to use the card Scavenge. Because even if you scavenge the program that you brought out with Kabonesa Wu, it is considered to be a different copy of the program because you trashed it and reinstalled it from your bin. Therefore, it is not considered. So yeah, the game does not remember your program, and as a result, it won't be removed from the game if you scavenge it. Before the end of your turn. What other ways are there to mitigate this downside? Well, even though Scavenge is the only card that allows you to refresh your program, so as to speak, you can use cards such as Chameleon and Brahman, which have end of turn triggers to return cards back into your stack in the case of Brahman, or back to your grip for Chameleon. So because it is your turn, and both the Kabonesa Wu and Chameleon/Brahman triggers are both yours, you get to order them in your choosing. So if you fire off Chameleon/Brahman before Kabonesa Wu, the program will be uninstalled from your board before Kabonesa Wu can fire and remove your program from the game. This basically means, for example, you can potentially get you can use these over and over again with Kabonesa Wu without worrying about them being removed from the game, which is pretty cool. Finally, you can also use things that trash themselves by the end of your turn. Self-modifying code is the most notable of these. With its clickless trash ability, you can potentially use it to get another program that will actually stick on the board when the turn ends. Those bird breakers such as Saker are another good example. Even though it's not a trash ability, they basically uninstall themselves by the end of your turn if you're able to use them. For example, in Saker's case, by derezzing an opponent's barrier. So these are the cards that you want to consider when building a Kabonesa deck. And the big question is, what sort of shell, what sort of breakers, what sort of other programs do you want to use to maximize the efficiency of your identity and to get around the RFG downside the best? Well, as you know, it's been more than a month since this data pack came out down the white now, and there has been no shortage of people experimenting with it. In fact, I think this is one of the most well experimented identities out there so far. There's such a huge myriad of decks available, all with very good ratings on Netrunner DB. There's no time to go through all of them here, but I'd like to highlight some of the more standout ones in my opinion. Here's a very standard shaper deck that seems like it could almost be played out of Kate or Haley. The main benefit of using Kabonesa Wu in such a standard shaper build is that you can very reliably bring out a turn 1 magnum opus regardless of your opening hand. So the play is to use Kabonesa Wu's ability on self-modifying code and then immediately crack it for Magnum Opus, which costs you 7 credits. Easily doable on the first turn, regardless of what you start with. Bonus points if you start with something like a stim hack or a scavenge that can allow you to, bring out the Opus directly, for example. Or, in the case of stim hack, to install the Magnum Opus without paying the 7 credits, which is pretty cool. Right, this is a deck that really abuses the fact that you can remove programs from your stack easily. This is a deck based around Oracle May, and it's really, this is not a new concept, flooding your deck with lots of events and naming event every time you draw up with Oracle May. What makes this really magical is that once you have enough money, you can remove all the programs from your stack entirely by bringing out 3 self-modifying codes with your ability and converting them all to each of your 3 icebreakers. Suddenly there are no more programs in your deck. The rest of your entire deck is essentially all events, meaning that you get very consistent Oracle May triggers from that point on without worrying about milling your breakers due to Oracle May. A very wonderful combo, a very ingenious one as well. Here's where we start getting into Janktown. This is an Au revoir Rubicon deck, which seems like it should be played out of Criminal. The reason why this works very well in Kabonesa Wu is that you can very reliably get 3 Au revoir set up by turn 1, because Au revoir is a program and you can easily get it out with the self-modifying code trick that I mentioned earlier. Use Kabonesa Wu on self-modifying code, use self-modifying code on Au revoir, it sticks on the board. Do that 3 times and suddenly you have a super Magnum Opus in play. Here's another deck that basically does the same thing but with origami. Now there's too many moving parts in this deck for me to go through everything. If you haven't seen this deck before, I can't explain every single part of it to you. There's lots of random cards in here that makes it look like a complete jank tier 76 deck. But in reality, it works very well because your turn 1 is almost always spent assembling your 3 origamis, which brings your hand size up to 14. Then all you have to do is to play a game day and suddenly you draw a bunch of cards to your max hand size, which is 14. And yeah, you basically just draw all the combo pieces you need to win the game right there and then. This is why this deck is pretty powerful and not as janky as it was before because of the reliability granted by origami into game day. Personally, I think Kabonesa Wu into origami and game day is one of the most powerful interactions possible with this identity, and something that you probably want to build around if you want a competitive Kabonesa Wu deck. Simply because you can just set up so darn quickly and get all the moving pieces into your hand by turn 2. It's not a stretch at all. So one thing you observe in common, especially with the last 2 decks, is that they actually can perform very well and consistently despite the number of janky moving pieces in their decks. And that is due to a very simple reason. The most crucial aspect to Kabonesa Wu, in my opinion, is the ability to reliably assemble 3 of the same program in the early game, be it the Au revoirs in the Au revoir deck or the origamis in the Art of Folding deck. And when I say reliably in this context, I actually mean every single game. In a lot of other decks, even tier 1 decks, like when we say it would be very nice if an AstroScript pilot program in your opening hand that was pre-rotation, or say if you have a commercial bankers group or Sensi Actors Union if you are playing CTM, for example, it still relies on you finding one of those cards in your opening hand. Whereas with these decks, your opening hand almost doesn't matter. Even if you start with the worst possible opening hand, even if your opponent could choose which 5 cards to place in your opening hand, you can still viably get 3 origamis set up by turn 1 in the case of the origami deck, or with Au revoir, well, by turn 2 you can definitely get the Au revoirs up and running. So that is the amazing part. Your opening hands don't matter that much anymore. Your consistency is always right there as long as you're playing the deck, which is pretty phenomenal. So yeah, with all these decks explored, I feel like Kabonesa Wu has basically been solved, at least for this meta. Everyone is 1 month ahead of me. What am I to do? How am I supposed to successfully demo when you've seen all these wonderful decks out there? Firstly, I'm not a good shaper player, much less a deck builder. I'm not going to innovate anything better than what these wonderful players have done here. So instead, I would probably be, net decking one of these decks and trying it out for myself, but there's actually something else I want to do here. So Kabonesa Wu has another special trait, one which I think a lot of people might have overlooked, and at this point we'll be diving very deep into the Jang Tang right here. So if you're looking for, a tier 1 competitive deck, please stop the video right here, get out and go enjoy the sun or something, because this video is not for you. For the rest of you who are remaining, I'm going to show you how to play a runner deck without the most important card in the entirety of this game, even extending to the history of this game. A card that has existed since the core set was printed back in 2012. A card so powerful, but yet so important to the game that was never placed on the most wanted list. And I can tell you that every single world champion since the very beginning has used this card. Yep, it's not Sure Gamble. And those of you who have been following me on Slack, you know what's coming. It's the basic runner action card. This basic action card is ubiquitous, even though we don't bring it to tournaments or regular game nights anymore, because we know what actions the runner has available to them. If you rip this away and prevent the runner from using any of these actions at all, you realize that it's basically impossible to play this game. For those of you not familiar with this concept, the runner action card is used in basically every single game. To illustrate this, let me tell you what you can't do if you don't have the runner action card available. You cannot click for credits, which means you cannot earn money. You can't draw past your opening hand because you can't click to draw. And you can't even play any cards from your hand because there is a click ability on the runner action card that says to install a program, a piece of hardware or resource, or to play an event. Without the runner action card, you cannot install cards, you cannot play cards, you cannot earn money, you can't draw, and you can't even win on agendas because you can't make runs. So how can you possibly play without the runner action card? Well, Kabonesa Wu is here to save the day. Her ability is a game changer because now you have an access to a click ability right from turn 1 that allows you to gain access to more click abilities when you tutor up programs that have clicks on them. So that is the deck that we are going to be building today. We are going to attempt to win a game without using the basic action card. Of course, we have to be mindful of the RFG, the remove from game effect from Kabonesa Wu. This is something that you usually get around with Scavenge, but obviously we cannot play Scavenge from hand. So, let's see how we are going to circumvent the limitations of not being able to use the runner basic action card. Firstly, we are not able to run normally, but we can bring out programs that give us the click ability to make a run. While Keyhole has rotated, we still have some pretty decent click-to-run cards available in Sneak Door and Analog Dreamers, but the most crucial of them all is the Tracker. We are more than happy to spend 6 influence on 3 copies of Tracker for our deck, simply because it's the only click-to-run program that allows us to make a run on remotes. That is very important, because otherwise the corp can just score in the remotes and we can't challenge the remote. Now, there's a very subtle nuance about Tracker for those of you who've never really played this card, and it's something that I encountered. I'm one of those who never really played with Tracker. I encountered that while, trying to attempt a win with this deck. So, as you can see in the video here, my opponent rushes out behind a single piece of ice, and I think I can get in due to Tracker's bypass effect, or rather, bypassing subroutines, so as to speak. So I immediately use Kabonesa Wu's ability to bring the Tracker out so I can target it at the remote, only to realize that it's not targeted at the remote. I can only target servers when my turn begins. So if you don't have a Tracker pre-installed at the start of your turn, you cannot threaten runs at all. This is a very crucial aspect to keep in mind if you are going to be attempting to play this janky tier 967 deck. Here's a video snippet of me demonstrating another one of those click-to-run cards. It's Sneak Door Beta. This is a very powerful surprise tool against most corps who won't see it coming and won't ice archives, simply because who needs to ice archives against Kabonesa Wu? As a result, you're going to get 3 free runs on HQ, which can easily yield 1 or 2 agendas, very helpful in your quest to win on agenda points. Unfortunately, in this game, I fired it off way too late. As you can see, it's, what, turn 10 or something? There are no agendas in my opponent's hand. Still, it's a very powerful one-off tool, and it's something that you're fine with removing from the game because you only need the surprise factor once. In that sense, it kind of plays like a Professor deck, where you always include the Sneak Door Beta because it's influence-free, and you bring it out when you can surprise the runner the best. We need a replacement to draw as well. We can't click to draw. However, this deck doesn't need to draw. Don't forget, we can't play cards from our hand anyway, so there is no need for any draw abilities. So we can happily skip deck. We will be stuck with the opening cards in the opening hand from the start of the game to the finish. Now, what about clicking for credits? Credits are important. Without credits, we can't install cards with Kabonesa Wu or use breakers. And for that, there's a very easy solution in Magnum Opus. Unfortunately, it is a restricted card, so that's our restricted slot basically burned that way. It's mandatory to play Magnum Opus. There's no other way you're going to get economy anywhere near a sustainable level without the Magnum Opus. So we're going to run that, and we have to find a way to mitigate the RFGs. It's not very useful having a Magnum Opus that you can only use for the remainder 3 clicks of your turn, after which it will be removed into the nether. So self-modifying code allows you to do that, which is all fine and dandy, but to install our breakers, we need some other aids. After all, we only have 3 users of self-modifying code. We can't get by with just 3 installed programs. This is where Customize Secretary and DaVinci come in. Customize Secretary allows you to install up to 5 programs randomly, and depending on your luck, you could get some really cool programs out. And this is the main way of getting programs to stick on your board instead of vanishing after the end of your turn. DaVinci is a good backup last-ditch option in case there are some key programs that are stuck in your hand. DaVinci allows you to install them from your hand, and they will stick to the board as well. So these are the cards we are going to be using, and the deck will look something like this. For those of you who haven't realized by now, there is no point in playing anything other than programs because you won't be able to install them from your hand normally. So we are playing a full 45 program deck in Kabonesa Wu. And yeah, I would explain all the remaining cards in the deck in detail, but I think I'll leave that for the gameplay itself. Playing this deck is a real uphill battle, trust me on this one, which is why I've taken Kabonesa to the casual lobby where I'm facing against a stronger together player. Now we get into our very first decision of the game, keep or mull. With most normal Netrunner decks, you are usually mulliganing for some particular cards in your opening hand. For example, a Geist player might want to mulligan for Tech Trader, while a Shaper player might aggressively seek out an opening Professional Contacts. In contrast, with this particular Kabonesa deck, you are mulliganing for cards to not be in your hand. Don't forget, the cards in your hand are considered dead because they cannot be installed using Kabonesa's ability, which only works from the stack. So, for example, my opening hand that you saw had a David in it. If I kept that opening hand, it would mean that I have no access to my one-off David for the remainder of the game, which is why I took the mulligan. Against a stronger together deck with lots of big ice, I think I am going to need my David this game. With that mulligan decision out of the way, your first 2 turns are essentially set in stone every single game, meaning that you can autopilot your way for the start of the game. Your first turn is always going to be first 2 clicks, get Sahasraras out, and then click 3, get SMC out to SMC for Magnum Opus. Reason being that you need to get the Magnum Opus on the board as early as possible, and this is the best way to do it, hands down. SMC into Magnum Opus costs 7 credits. And you only start with 5 credits. You cannot click for credits, so we are using a very creative way to click for credits by using Kabonesa to get Sahasraras out. Because of Kabonesa's discount, the Sahasraras cost 1 to install instead of 2, but they return you 2 credits every time you install a program. So this way they give us the 1 credit extra we need for each Sahasrara to get the Magnum Opus on the table with SMC. Your turn 2 is always going to be click for 8 credits with Magnum Opus because you need to restore your money. And now we get into the turn 3. where we can start doing some fun things, instead of autopiloting the deck. So, once you get your economy out, the next thing you want to do is to get memory. The big problem with this opening play is that the magnum opus immediately takes up half of your MU, and you cannot install consoles or hardware because you're Kabonesa with 45 programs. So we are going to get a customized secretary out, which allows us to install programs permanently on the board. And what we are really looking for here is one of our 6 demons. As you see here, I got lucky with this customized secretary in that one of the 5 programs on the secretary is the leprechaun, which I immediately bring out. With my remaining clicks, I'm going to empty the secretary with cards that I would need, namely the RNG key and the tracker, both very crucial cards. Tracker allowing me to start threatening runs on any of my opponent's servers, and RNG key will be kind of like a desperado. If I guess a correct number, I'll gain some money, which is quite important because the magnum opus is not going to give you enough money for the whole game. If you are spending the whole game clicking money for magnum opus, you're going to lose to faster corps. So we can begin running now. I'm going to aim my tracker on R&D because my opponent isn't threatening anything in the remote at all. So we are going to make a tracker run knowing that we can dodge one set routine thanks to tracker's ability. The other reason why we need so much money is that tracker's a very expensive program to use repeatedly. It's 2 credits, so it basically burns off 2 clicks. 1 click to use the tracker and another to regain the money using magnum opus. My opponent doesn't rest their R&D ice here, and I steal a Vitruvius, which is good, although I don't get an RNG key trigger. I guess 4 when Vitruvius is the number 3. Too bad for me. Alright, so the game goes on here, and we'll just continue pressuring runs on R&D until my opponent actually forces me to get breakers out. The other important reason why you need demons in play is because your programs take a surprising amount of memory. As mentioned, the Mopus costs 2 MU, but the tracker is actually also a 2 MU cost. So yeah, both Deck Deer and Leprechaun are very key cards. This is another consideration when you look at your opening hand. The more there are in your deck, the better, because customized secretary works off probabilities. The more demons in your deck, the higher chance that a given customized secretary will hit one of your demons. In this case, there are 2 of my 6 demons in my grip, which is actually quite bad, because that means that the customized secretary is very unlikely to get me any further demons. It also doesn't help that my SMCs are limited. I already used 1 SMC for the magnum opus, and there's 1 stuck in my hand, and it can't really get out. So yeah, I'm kind of suffocating right now with only 1 free memory left on the board. Meanwhile, my opponent plays very cheekily, jamming lots of cards in their double ice remote, which I'm a bit afraid to contest because I don't have breakers. As a result, my opponent quickly gets up 4 points to my 2 points. Despite my strong R&D pressure, I'm still behind this game. Never mind though, we'll continue getting runs of R&D as my opponent keeps their ice unrezzed, and I'm gonna fire RNG key here once again. I'm gonna bid 4, and yet again, only to see a preemptive action. So this is where single access is really not paying off for me, as I'm not able to steal agendas faster than my opponent can score them. In fact, they're already threatening match point. They can easily install double advance and Ikawa in the remote, for example, and that would mean bad news for me. So here I'm going to try my luck with my second customized secretary. I'm going to see 5 programs here, none of which are what I want. I really wanted another demon, but instead I see a bunch of nonsense. So I need to be careful with what I put on the customized secretary here. Remember Carbonesa's RFG ability, which means that at the end of the turn, the customized secretary will be exiled and any hosted cards on it will go straight into the bin, which is why I only chose to get the equivocation up with customized secretary, because it would be immediately trashed as I install the equivocation. I'm out of memory right now, but the equivocation allows me to continue pressuring R&D by getting essentially two accesses of R&D instead of 1 every time I run, making it a lot better for me. So this is going to be some immense R&D pressure that my opponent must respond to immediately, because I could potentially very likely actually see agendas off the top of R&D in the coming future. There's a bit of downtime in this game, so let me talk a bit about why Magnum Opus is so important. As we know, we are not allowed to use the basic action card. Typically, after making a couple of runs, as you see me pressuring R&D throughout this entire game so far, you will often have dangling clicks, you know, 1 or 2 clicks remaining where you don't really have anything to do. The problem with not being able to use the basic action card is that you can't simply just click to draw or click to take credits in your spare time, because you don't have access to those actions. So this is why you always need to have Magnum Opus installed, no matter how rich you are, because it gives you a way to convert those clicks into resources, and more importantly, a way to use up clicks without resorting to the basic action card. The other thing to notice about this deck is that it is actually quite skill intensive to pilot. Oftentimes you'll be seeking a particular program in your deck and you have to ask yourself what is the best way to get that program on the board. You could install it directly with Kabonesa Wu, but you have to keep in mind that it will be removed from game once you're done with it this turn. Or you could search it out with SMC, but that requires 2 free memory, and it requires you to have remaining SMCs in the deck. Or you could gamble and try to hit it on a customized secretary install. You have to calculate the probability with which the secretary will fetch you the program you need, and you also need to make sure that you have enough money and clicks remaining so that in the event that you don't hit your program, at least you have remaining clicks and credits to install the other programs you found on the secretary. So there's actually a lot of thought into going into this. You know, sometimes you might just want to use Kabonesa's ability just to get rid of some programs from your deck, thin your deck so that the chances of hitting the desired program with customized secretary is higher. Now the game continues on, and as much as I like to demonstrate to you my full rig, unfortunately I'm completely full on memory and I want to win this game. So unfortunately I'm just gonna keep running, because in this particular situation that I'm in, I'd rather win sooner than later, given that I have absolutely no memory to install my breaker suite on. Doing so would require me to give up my RNG key so that there will be 1 free memory slot which I can use to fetch an SMC, for example, to get a demon or something. So I'm going to access a closed accounts here, interestingly, and I'm going to equivocate it, guess a number with RNG key. I've been guessing the number 4 all this while. Is it time to switch it up? I'm having such an internal struggle because I've seen so many low numbers. Preemptive is 0, close accounts is 1, so I decide, okay, I'm gonna go for 2. It might be a Maryland, it might be a shipment from Tenin. Yeah, let's try the number 2. I think it might pay off here. Might be a Naja as well. Nah, I'm gonna stick to 4. It's a Victor 1.0, that's a number 3. Still no luck. This RNG key hasn't been paying off at all. Alright, so I'm going to pass the turn over to my opponent, and yeah, as long as they're not going to fortify R&D, I'm going to be happy just slamming R&D. It seems like they're finally dedicating more ice to R&D though. Surprisingly, they're not rezzing the innermost ice, which is kind of curious. I'm expecting that it's something huge like a Fairchild 4, or just Fairchild, as most of you might know, and my opponent can't really afford to res that. So I'm going to tracker R&D again, knowing that I can negate 1 subroutine of my choice. And with 3 clicks remaining, I don't have to worry about painful face checks. I'm going to see a Victor 1.0 here, which was just drawn off the top. So I'm going to decide here whether to let tracker fire on 1 subroutine or to click through both subroutines. I'm going to click 1 subroutine and allow tracker to fizzle on the other, knowing that with 2 clicks remaining, I'm fine against most things. Fairchild 3 is not an option as my opponent's too poor, and my opponent shows me why they haven't been rezzing the innermost ice all this while. It was a Ravana that had no subroutines to fire off. So I'm going to see a Bioroid work crew here, which I equivocate, and it's time to guess the number again. I'm going to guess the number 4, because I've been guessing number 4 all this while. I'm going to see a shipment from Tenin. I wanted to guess the number 2. Oh, I was so close to doing that. Alright, so now my opponent's starting to force breakers out. Or are they? If you think about it, even though it costs 4 clicks to break all the subroutines on R&D, it actually doesn't, because with tracker, surprisingly, I'm allowed to negate 1 subroutine. So I only need to, you know, spend 3 clicks to get through R&D. But first, I'm going to divert my tracker to server 2. There's been a card that was incubating there all this while, and because I was able to force my opponent to spend 6 credits resing the Victor into Ravana, I now can run the remote without worrying too much about big ice. My opponent shows me a Victor which I can easily waltz past between tracker and a click, and I'm going to be able to access my opponent's elective upgrade that they were always too poor to score. So this was a huge pull for me because it suddenly puts me on match point. And yeah, this was a very game-changing pull. Now, another important reason is that with all 3 Vitruviuses out of the way, as you can see they're all in the score area, I don't have to worry about never advance anymore. So I can just focus all my attention on R&D without worrying about advanced remotes until my opponent advances them. So yes, as mentioned, I could easily try to get my decoder out, but you know, given the option to tracker R&D and spend all 3 clicks to get past it, why not? I'd rather win sooner than later, and I don't really want to spend times assembling a rig anyway. So I'm going to force my opponent to draw the preemptive action here. Firing the RNG key here, I'm not gonna guess number 4, it has been betraying me. No, I'm gonna guess number 2, but I get the number 4 in the CFC excavation contract. Not that it matters, because that's the winning agenda. I won! I won a game without using the basic action card. That is a huge achievement in itself. I can't overstate this. When I first started playing a couple of games and losing by landslide, I thought this would be an impossible challenge. Even though it's theoretically possible to win without using the basic action card, in reality, unless your opponent is, you know, throwing you a bone or 10, it's nearly impossible to get your rig set up nicely because so much is down to luck, and it's still very difficult to siege remote servers. It took me 3 tries to get this game to work, which is relatively on par with the hidden objectives I did before. If you remember, I created a 9-0 rig with Chaos Theory once, and I got to 100 credits as the corp another time. But yeah, they were pretty difficult as well. This one was no less difficult. I was very lucky that on my 3rd try, I met an opponent that was a very good matchup in the Stronger Together matchup, because all my opponent's ice could be clicked through, meaning that I did not need to install a single icebreaker to win the game. So I wouldn't recommend trying this deck yourself. I mean, you could sleeve it up. I'll put the deck list in the description as usual, I guess, but trust me, it's going to be very difficult. I think the best part about it is that you get to utterly confuddle your opponents and watch the horror in their faces as they wonder what sort of weird stuff you're doing with customized secretary. I mean, this is a very good excuse to play that card that is otherwise completely overshadowed by self-modifying code. You also get to dumbfound your opponents with the epic turn 1 play of Sahasrara Magnum Opus. Woohoo! Yeah. So that aside, you're probably not going to win any games with this. Now, we did not talk much about Kabonesa Wu herself. Admittedly, there was no strategy discussion here, certainly no tier 1 competitive discussion, but if there's one take-home point I want to drive with this identity, it's that this Kabonesa Wu really is an identity for all. On the janky side of the spectrum, this identity enables the jankiest of decks. I mean, the showcase I did on Netrunner DB earlier, where I show you all the decks on Netrunner DB, just proves this. There's so many different decks archetypes you can make with Kabonesa, and yeah, the kind of programs that you can splash into this identity, you know, are virtually limitless. It's only limited by your imagination, really. And on the other end of the spectrum, tier 1 competitive player, I'm fairly sure some competitive players would look to this as an identity to shore up early game consistency. For example, Dane's deck, regular Shaper with Congress Kate, so-called, very reliably gets Magnum Opus out turn 1. This is the kind of thing that competitive players like to have, a reliable economy. So basically what I'm trying to say is that no matter which end of the spectrum you're at, or even if you're somewhere in the middle, Kabonesa Wu will have something for you, something that will, you know, entice you to build a deck with her and try her out for yourself. And I'm sure many of you at home have been experimenting with this identity. What sort of fun stuff have you come up with? I'm sure there are many more ideas that I haven't even gotten to see, and I would love to hear from you. Leave it in the comment section if you had any interesting ideas with Kabonesa Wu, and share it with fellow viewers. It's very rare that we get a card that, you know, can be enjoyed by all players, and I think Kabonesa Wu pretty much fits the bill. So well done, Netrunner designers. This was a good one. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and happy net running. I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.